This meeting is being recorded.
Well, welcome to FearTalk 24. This is Dr. R. Michael Fisher, and I'm doing these FearTalks with guests that I find and collect from the garbage can and or the higher forms of higher education. I will basically interview them. They will interview me at the same time, and that's why we call it a dialogue. It really is more a conversation that is about creating ideas, creating inquiry together. It's not about necessarily arguing and getting who's right, who's wrong. So if you've tuned into any of the Fear Talks over the last 6 years that I've been doing these, folks, I welcome you to check those out on my YouTube channel and basically see that my interest is really to have these rarefied conversations about fear in a nuanced, in-depth, intelligent, and informed way. And that doesn't mean that there won't be feelings. That doesn't mean that there won't be fear. That doesn't mean that there won't be emotional aspects as well, because I tend to collect around very passionate speakers. That's my intro for today, and I'm going to introduce very briefly John Coleman, who he will introduce himself, but he is someone I've come across in the last year or a bit, and we connected to become co-educators and thinkers in the Apocatastasis Institute of Humanities out on the East Coast of North America. So over to John. I've asked him to come in with a short invocation of something he thought was important to set the tone for today. Welcome, John. You're in Connecticut, is it? Massachusetts?
Yes, I am, Michael.
Connecticut.
Yes, I'm up on the border of Connecticut, where I'm sitting on top of, right next to the New York border. If I were to go outside, I could see the hills, and right over those hills are Patterson and Pauling and all of that stuff. There are barbarians over there. We're the civilized ones up in Connecticut here. So
okay,
indeed, holding down the fort.
We won't start with any controversy. No, we'll just start. Okay, John, over to you.
Indeed. But thank you for having me. Yes, thank you for having me. And I've really enjoyed your series, Michael, as you've gone through so many guests and so many topics, though it's nominally about fear, and you always bring it back to that and fearlessness. It's amazing how many subsequent topics you get into today, a little bit with history, but so many other things you've gotten into in the past. So bravo on that series. As for a collective thought, I thought to read this poem, The Fool, by Patrick Pearse. And we might put this in the context of your series here and your research of being fearless and having maybe the foolishness to be fearless. And it's only in those unguarded spirits that we really do anything productive in our lives. If we're weighed down with what others might think, etc.,
right,
we don't tend to go very far. And that will play a role in our historical discussion and why fear is fostered and who's doing that fostering. But anyhow, the poem, The Fool. Since the wise men have not spoken, I speak that am only a fool that hath loved his folly. Yea, more than the wise men, their books and their counting houses and their quiet homes and their fame in men's mouths. A fool that hath in all his days done never a prudent thing, never hath counted the cost, nor recked if another reaped the fruit of his mighty sowing. A fool that is unrepentant, and that soon shall laugh in his lonely heart as the ripe ears fall to the reaping hooks of the ones that were empty, though he go hungry. I have squandered the splendid years the Lord God gave to my youth in attempting impossible things, deeming them alone worth the toil. Was it folly or grace? Not men shall judge me, but God. I've squandered the splendid years. Lord, if I had the years over again, I would squander them again. I fling them from me. For this I have heard in my heart, that a man should do the deed of today, nor take thought of tomorrow's teen. Shall not bargain or huckster with God, or was it a jest of Christ? And is this my sin before men to have taken him at his word? The lawyers have sat in council, the men with keen, long faces, and said, He blasphemeth. And another hath said, This man is a fool. And the wise have pitied the fool that hath striven to give a life in the world of time and space, among the bulks of actual things, to a dream that was dreamed in the heart, and that only the heart could hold. So once again, that's part of the poem The Fool by Patrick Pearse.
Why would you bring that today? As and you obviously no doubt have shared it with your students, faculty, and parts of your community, no doubt, and others. Why does that sort of fit for you today?
Well, as we look at the topic of fear in history and in education, as we move towards later on, I think a major aspect of that conditioning and that natural weakness I think we have that we're additionally massaged into in this society for certain ends. I believe a lot of that is able to be effective, and it's able to be so paralyzing because everyone, especially in the manner that we are educated, is constantly being asked to fit in to the society. No one does a darn thing except that they're looking over the shoulder, making sure they don't rock the boat, making sure they don't step on toes. And I think in your admirable goal of your research of fearlessness and overcoming ungrounded fears, that that sentiment of being foolish and throwing that concern to the wind and having that devil may care attitude, I think that is such a necessary ingredient. So that is why I chose that poem.
Right. So educational philosophy, who I'm talking to today, John, here's how I understand you, and then you can correct me before we dive into your book and that you've written that I've been just reading the intro to by the title Hurt, and that's just a little secret for people to stick around and hear a very provocative book that John has written in 2015 that I'm just reading for the first time. So first of all, just to connect, my Fearology Center idea and notion has been around for a long time in different forms. And I've always been a big picture visionary kind of prophetic thinker about education and just generally the telos of humanity and how I might match in some way an educational imperative toward a particular philosophical or theological theology. And when John recognized my work and I recognized his work about a year and a half ago, and that was actually through a podcast interview you did with Barbara Stengel, Dr. Barbara Stengel. And I was studying Dr. Barbara Stengel's work for an article in my book. And I was very interested in her notions of fear and education. And then I saw you had interviewed her in my research. I went and checked that podcast and I said, John Coleman and Barb Stengel at that time. She was very positive toward you and the Apocatastasis Institute, saying you're doing great work. And I went, I got to check this out. So there was just a little history, John, of how you and I connected originally. But what I was
Great, thank
getting
you.
to is that the Fearology Institute was an idea I've had for many decades, or at least a couple decades, of how could I attach that, either create my own institute that would be a study of fear and fearlessness under various names that I've had. And I've tried various ventures and entrepreneurial, social entrepreneurial ventures, and tried even connecting with a consulting company, a business organizational leadership company in the United States at one point, and they were, oh, fearless leadership. This is such a great idea, Michael. And I worked with them for, a year or so, and eventually they just like, you're too radical. Like, this is way beyond what we want to call fearless leadership in business and leadership, organizational development. So then I kept thinking, where am I ever going to find a home? If I can't build it myself, and I found I haven't been able to really build a sustainable home where we could actually bring an educational curriculum circulating around the notion of fear and fearlessness in history and in evolution of humanity or consciousness, we could call it. And so when I found your institute and you recognized, you said, why don't you bring the Fearology Institute or Center into the Apocatastasis Center Institute for the Humanities, a center within the center. I think that's what you and I talked about. And so I want to just share with people that that's a very unique idea, that here is the first educator, John Coleman, thank you, founder of the Apocatastasis Institute, or at least co-founder. And John basically recognized something. So that's part of our conversation today is what's your understanding of the history of humanity and why you would start this very alternative of the alternatives, I like to call your institute, that is moving forward and that I am now part of with the Fearology Institute, our center. So John, all of that intro is really thank you for being an educational philosopher who is a fool, and I recognize the fool in me.
Great. In the land of misfit toys, it's good to see some like-minded souls. Very good, Michael. Thank you so much for that. And thank you for giving me the background there with Barbara. I'll have to run her down soon and get her back on the show. And her work with John Dewey in particular up in Vermont, I think it was.
And I hear that Barb
in any case,
Barb Stengel, just to say, is now the president of the American John Dewey Society.
Oh,
yeah.
Wow. Okay. So
just brand new.
That's a promotion, I think, since we last spoke. Thank you so much. And so you asked two questions. The role as I see fear in history and then in education. And having gone through, particularly recently, with some classes I've taught and then some discussions I've had with colleagues, I've been invited to think about cycles of history, and there are different models around there. But one of the things it would seem at this hour is that in the West that we're really kind of come full circle, and we're about to do another revolution, another go through. And if people are not familiar with this, you kind of have a situation throughout human history of slavery, and then there's a rebirth or a psychic rebirth, and then that manifests itself in social institutions. Then people sit on their oars, and then the social institutions decay and become parasitic, and then you end up back in a situation of slavery, and then rinse and repeat. And as I see things in our hour, over the past really 500 years, we've come full circle, and we're back really in the situation of tremendous social manipulation and parasitism. And what we're doing at the Institute, Mikhail, with his fear work, as I see it, and many other good works besides, is culturally we're really in this fermentation phase of what will replace this husk of a society that we've inherited. And in my line of work and with Michael's experience, and one of the things I think we share, which is why this work of the past year has been so successful, is also being in the trenches of this fermentation. We really can see in our day-to-day interaction with various people we come across the dynamics that we're up against, and including keeping institutions going. And every day, I would say probably since the 1980s, that we've been, as a society, every day the deck tilts harder against what we're doing because of the nature of what we've been given as a social model of the consumer. Prior to the 70s or 80s, you had the idea of the citizen, which had its problems, but there was at least an idea of social engagement. Since the 80s until now, we've been given this idea of the consumer, the person who exists to be served by others. And the psychology behind that is completely different. And we can see, I can certainly see this, and based off of Michael's earlier comments and some private discussions we've had about his earlier work there, it's similar, the difficulty of trying to move beyond just talking, and to build social institutions, and to reify, to instantiate our work in real life. It becomes more difficult by the day because of social trends. And those are deliberate. Those are deliberate. And one of the biggest ones to the book that we're talking about today, to hurt, is the manipulation of trust in society. It's cynical manipulation, the abuse of what I think are good things: patriotism, loyalty, indeed civic engagement, affection. Bring things way up close to our time. What I believe during the COVID-19 saga was a tremendous abuse of human compassion for ends that had nothing to do with health at all. In fact, I've thought since the 2015 publication of this book to add many more chapters to it, because this theme of the abuse of trust is something, once you see it, it becomes so obvious to explain a very atomized society that we have, and why the society has been steered in the way it has. So those would be my responses to the historical aspect of Michael's initial question. And then towards pedagogy, it's once one starts looking at society and start asking, why are things the way they are, economically, spiritually, and in terms of problems and the interaction, one sees that a major choke point of that is the way knowledge is disseminated in society and the way we are taught to think. And as I see it, a lot of that has to do with pedagogy, with education. And as I've written about elsewhere this year in certain essays and more recent books, this society, as I see it, is interesting because we are trained to be the agents of our own oppression, whether that's economic combinations or other ones besides. We have been trained to actually want to work in certain social combinations and so forth. And I look at this, and I look at the enforcers of this system, and I come back to the reality: these were all little boys and girls at some point. And it's with that consciousness, to the second point of Mikhail's question, that I feel that pedagogy and right education, formal education, is so important. And again, moving beyond just the talking aspect, in this hour of fermentation. Okay, we've been talking on podcasts and shows and newsletters for how many decades about education. Now we're instantiating it in reality. And why put so much effort for so little compensation, materially and elsewhere? Because this is, as I see it, the linchpin. Formal education is the linchpin of this system. And if the youth and people starting off in life can be given that spirit of fearlessness, of agency, which is, I suppose, my way of saying the same thing, then these systems will at least have a blow struck against them, if they won't wither altogether.
Yeah, thank you. Lots there to sit with, and I encourage people to check out. I will put links to the Apocatastasis Institute. You have a lot of material on your philosophy, on the types of programs you offer, the kinds of students that come, endorsements, etc. So we won't cover that today to take up time. Those websites are available, and lots of podcasts that John has done talking to different educators as well on his podcast series. So I'm going to just basically ask you in sort of simple terms, if that's even possible, are you trying to reclaim humanity in your institute?
Yes. I think of a song by an old labor leader and revolutionary James Connolly, be moderate, be moderate. And the refrain in that old IWW, International Workers of the World, the refrain is we are moderate. All we're asking for is the world. But yes, I mean, fundamentally, I see child rearing practices and indeed how this manifests itself in the educational structure all the way through adult years, all the way through the college years, as fundamentally being an abusive situation. And that doesn't necessarily mean the people staffing these systems know what's going on. I think there's the teacher has been turned into too much of a whipping boy. Often people can be involved with things and they don't really understand, their role in larger agendas. But I mean, look at, and you know this, Mikhail, with the American college system. Just look at the financing. You have a system from the jump that makes how many generations now of youth to be debt slaves for the remainder of their life. That's just one example of this abusive situation, and it's one brick in this tyranny. And so what this mission is fundamentally to restore elements of society, that our students will go out and go, not staff the systems of their oppression, not put the noose around their neck, and rather to grow new institutions that will replace this, whether that's educational or artistic or business, religious, and so forth, in any aspect of society, sports, why not? To look beyond this this low horizon that we learn in those many thousands of hours in school, to not dream, to not think big. I'm not the first person to point out the contradiction. Speaking of bad child rearing practices, I mean, everyone tells the kid you can be everything you want to be when you grow up, and then when you grow up, they tell you be realistic. I mean, this is a schizophrenic example, but it's a schizophrenic example in a schizophrenic society. And you wonder why people are bugged out in fentanyl and all this jazz, because they're given all of these big ideas, and then they're put into a system that tells them to be realistic, and then they're put into a system that discourages them further and plays off of their fear.
Yeah.
Watch the commercials. I mean, watch the commercials. They scare the hell out of you just with insurance. All right, you'll be nowhere without insurance, and you need to be in good hands and all this. But in any case, I mean, that's how I see formal education. Well done, agentic, fearless education is to go on and to lift the moral and spiritual and aspirational aspects of humanity. Yes, Michael.
So we think of even a core kind of curriculum ethos, we might call it, that should and ought to be in both childcare, rearing, in our views, and others that we've read and studied for decades. But it's not just our views, but it's like a core ethos of actually raising and growing and developing and thinking and envisioning a future. This would be my way of putting it, without this constant nagging of the cultural, the parental, the community, the institutional fear of being left behind. This is so fundamental, and it just seeps, right?
Yeah, I mean,
it seeps into every crack and cranny of our socialization. And when did that really take off historically is a question I ask you, even though I'm just going to quote briefly one sentence from your book, which is entitled Hurt, the Thoughts on Disillusion, Distrust, Disorientation in the last few years. And you particularly look at the 150 years of Western history. We will get to that as we go in the hour. But you one sentence on, fairly much in chapter 1, on both individual and group levels, you say, the last century and a half is an example of snowballing psychosis.
Mm. So when did this get going? Well, in the big picture, as I see it, what you had throughout the early modern period, at least in much of the West, certainly here in North America, and Canada was part of this, was this growing spirit of freedom. And you had also the means where people could be more independent, not just politically, but just in a very nitty gritty way, to quote Carol Quigley, who I've been doing some discussions on, a historian from the mid 20th century. I mean, literally, the power that was in the hands of the state militarily was exactly the power in the hands of the individual. Think about the brown vest muscle. There was a parity there. And that led to a tremendous liberty amongst the population during the time of the Enlightenment, and people being able to strike out on their own. Um, and we think about the spirit of the pioneer, and what type of person that requires. And you get back into archetypes and things like that, and why different epochs of histories tend to produce certain people with a certain spirit. And then you had a formal breaking away from this system of control that had been growing after the church was basically broken up in the 16th century. You had the rise of absolutist states. At the same time, you had this rising liberty, and then you have the Enlightenment. And that had its own problems, as I would see it. But amongst that, you had people being able to shove back against systems of control, and that eventually asserted itself in political revolutions and whatnot. To the point that you had here in America for a good 80 years, a common law country, and remarkable experiment in liberty and ownership of individuals of their property, allodial ownership. Well, it turns out that the previous ruling classes don't like this, and you ask, when did this deliberate manipulation come about? And I would see it in by the mid to late 19th century, that this sort of power structure, which had taken off guard in the mid 18th century, had gotten its stability again. Had after about 100 years had figured out, the slaves had gotten off the plantation in more ways than one. How do you corral people back onto this system? And largely, I would see that with the structurally with the rise of the legal system, on top of the previous common law system. And some of this is distinctive to the American experience, but you can see a similar control structure being reasserted by the late 19th century into the 20th century, in different locales. I speak in chapter 1 on the unification of Italy, for instance, in the 1870s. So you see it there, and you see it, in so many other places. And at the same time, you see in the American West with the Indians and so forth. It's the same agenda that's rolling out across the world to get basically societies that aren't on a certain commercial and organizational system, to get them into that system by hook or by crook. And indeed, part of that is disorienting people, whether that's relocating natives into school systems and so forth, which is prominent these days in Canada. I understand that consciousness, it obviously happened down here. Or a really good way to scare the hell out of people and get the psychic state you want is war. That's a really good way. And so I really do see particularly the world wars as giant social experiments and very successful ways to break spirits individually and nationally. And to answer your question in a nutshell, though, I would see it by the mid 19th century is when the attorneys and the business classes and things had well, they hadn't forgotten anything. I'm afraid they did learn a few things, and so that leads to their system of control 2.0. To answer your question there.
Yeah, and it's one of the things that's striking in your chapter 1. You start off. I'll just read the very first sentence of that chapter. And I'll read the third page. I think these are, I think you start off this interesting metaphor, and I'm going to ask you why you're using this metaphor to start this book. I love the title, Hurt. I don't think there's a historian out there anywhere, and I'm not a historian expert. I do not think a historian starts any kind of treatise on the word hurt. And that is really interesting to me for a lot of reasons, because it's a different word for trauma. It's a much more word that goes in outside of the clinical discourse of trauma. A very professionalized kind of post-World War I, post-World War II medicalized discourse of hurt, of injury. So
yeah, you know, they say in English that
Go ahead. Go ahead.
They say in English that when people in our language want to be more visceral, they tend to use the Germanic and Saxon words in preference to Latinate words. And so it's interesting if in the medicalized aspect you have trauma, which sounds at least off the ear to be a Latinate word,
Okay.
whereas you have the hurt, which is obviously a Germanic or Anglo word. So just more proof of that phenomenon in English.
Nice, thank you.
Most of our cuss words are Germanic and Saxon.
Okay, I didn't know that, John. Here's the metaphor you start off with your first sentence in that intro chapter is clouds. We'll come back to that. Clouds of mistrust and sarcasm hang over our lives in the West. I mean, that's a very poetic, literary entry to your thesis, which is a great detailed thesis. I've just scanned over it. But let me read the second. The downpour. Now, we've got clouds and we have downpour. Starts in a sentence. From these clouds has grown a society of shallow interactions and cold souls. I mean, this is very poetic. It's very deeply and psychically hitting. And it's in a very simple language that captures. This is not an elite, esoteric, disciplinarity-driven language. Were you aware of that as a writer opening like that? And why clouds? Why?
Why clouds? Well, I would see. I can answer the first one. I'll revisit the intention or not in a moment here, but why clouds? Because I see this role of mistrust in society as being deliberately fostered. So I see it almost as a quantifiable thing. Obviously, I represented it as such just now in the book. But you know, these things also take a while. Clouds take a while to to form up. So what we're seeing now is as of this recording now, has been building, as I see it, at least for the last century and a half. And it takes a while, right? So how do you end up with what I have to deal with when I go into town and I say hi to people and they look like little scared Catholic schoolboys. They almost, some of these, and it's the men too. The women will like kind of say hi to you, but the grown men are they don't look at you. They look down. You say hi to them. They look like bunny rabbits. They want to run away. People look scared. Like how do we end up here? Okay, some of it was the COVID thing and the mask and all this jazz, but this has been building. This with a school function, someone that at one point offered to have their use their house for a very light function with the school, kind of a party, and talking about a low trust society. How do we get here? And this person wanted to see people's ID cards. This was just a meet and greet sort of thing, and they offered, and then they wanted like everyone's ID cards. And how do we end up like this? Wallahi, I'm not making this up. For the Christmas cards for the school, I ask people that that they've done school events and things. They've come to hikes that we've done. They've come to talks, and I know these people on a superficial level. I ask them, what's your address? I can give you a Christmas card, and they won't say it. I mean, there's such fear amongst people. They, like the Bible says, they run and no one's pursuing them. They run, there's no one pursuing them. And so I'm asking, how did we end up here? And I get back to the clouds. Well, this downpour that we have, this had to build for a long time of breaking bonds. And that would address a part of your question, Michael, as to the imagery, the use of the imagery. And I think the reason I used clouds and so forth as we begin in the 19th century, if I were to dust off my wet brain here, I would say, if I had to go back to 2015, why did I use that? Well, we begin 19th century, and I believe Karl Marx begins his manifesto with a similar idea that, I think he uses a ghost is haunting Europe. I think that's the opening line of the manifesto. But there was a certain echo to 19th century literature there. I used the storm, he used the poltergeist, but this idea of something's brooding over a people.
Fair enough. Yeah, fair enough. And nice connection. Thank you. And, ultimately, you say the West has on that same page, you're talking about culture in general, capital C almost. I argue the West created a retarded, vapid culture. Let me try and just elaborate on a real experience that happened to me as I visit educational institutions. I'm a consultant in an educational institution right now, to remain unnamed. Early childhood education drift to it, etc. And I'm sitting in the manager's meeting, etc. And what happens is everybody on the staff is concerned about the eclipse the other day. What are we going to do with the young people who want to go out and see the sun and blah, 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 and see this event? They're hearing the big hoopla in the cultural discourse, right? And I'm just watching the teachers, the administrators of this educational institution spend literally 15 to 20 minutes on trying to secure every possible error of having any child outside doors during the hour of this to the hour of that, set by some media or some experts who we don't even know who are doing that. And, it's like never in the entire 20 minutes of being with these educators, as I'm sitting there just listening, did we talk about curriculum. It was all entirely about safety and risk. I think that's a sample of what you're getting to, of this creating a culture that's retarded, and vapid culture is one way to say it. I came up in my dissertation work with a conference presentation. It was entitled, this was at a moral education conference in education philosophy. So this is back 20 years ago. And the title of it was something like Better Safe Than Moral. A very simple phrase. And I think it captivates a lot of what you're speaking to as well. And then you basically said Western humans are confused as what it means to be human. And that's why I think your Institute for the Humanities is actually a corrective. It's a corrective to these problems. So go ahead.
Yes, it's funny. I'm a historical board for the town. America's celebrating its 250th anniversary. That's one of the unique things about America, is we have a start date, and so here we are. And there's a school program going on down the road. Talk about safety, and I was asked, because I have some background in reenacting, I was asked to go in and talk about things to one of the junior highs. And tongue in cheek as I was, but you asked me the board asked me to go into the school as a soldier. Okay, so you asked me, so I'm going to ask you, school board. Well, it would make sense that I'm going to bring my gun, right? And you should have seen these people nearly wet their drawers. I mean, you should have seen the looks on these people. I mean, the fear and the so now I'm going to be a lame soldier without a weapon in the school for the assembly. But the point is, I mean, just the looks of just the mamby-pamby looks on their faces. And you see that too. It's such an obsession about fear, about safety, about safety. And what was the old line from Benjamin Franklin, right? He who would trade liberty for safety deserves neither. And this obsession about being safe, being safe, being safe. And I think part of that is that switcheroo that happened in the 70s and 80s, where the citizen concept, problematic in its own way, was switched out for the consumer. So now the consumer needs to not only, not rock the boat and some of those things we talked about earlier, but also he needs to be protected. He needs to be, he cannot defend himself. He cannot look out for his own interests. Right. This is the explosion of insurance, and sitting on top of Connecticut, which is like the center of insurance up in Hartford. But and you see it in many other ways, but it all plays on the fear that's inculcated. And yes, getting back to this idea, we don't know what it means to be human. I mean, that's something I'm always going back to, is an old medieval maxim, grace builds on nature. And we can apply that in a religious sense, but that really applies beyond, which I think is a testimony to its truth. So if you look at many groups, and we travel different communities, Mikhail, and I'm sure the audience does in their own travels, one of the problems that I think those of us who are committed to the good and to the reformation of society and to individual healthy education and child rearing, and we see all the problems, and we can tell you a few conspiracies, and we can tell you who should be voted in and out and all this jazz. One of the problems I think that we have on this side, on the good side, shall we say, the good guys, is that we don't understand grace builds on nature. And because of that, our efforts continually fall apart. And I'm sure you've seen that with your previous attempts to build these institutions and these collectives and things, is you run into the very real fact of how on an individual level how busted people are by this society. They have good ideas and things like that, but I see that with oftentimes the parents we have to work with and whatever. I mean, you're dealing with walking wounded, and they have the ideas. However, they would express them and noun them, but the nature part of them, their emotional stability, their own physical health, and their fitness and so forth, and living patterns and so forth, that is so busted. It leads to maybe to blow ups and so forth. I published this month another book on my memoirs of teaching in Ridgefield, Connecticut, and here was a school, just a petri dish. That whole book is just a petri dish of one school, because it's across the world, the same phenomena. Here's a school where people had ideas. They had a little bit of gumption to get things going, but the project just constantly just kept falling apart and just kept fizzling, and then it would kind of rebuild for a year or two and fall apart. And I believe the reason for that, and the difficulties we have in our own avocations and trying to reify our visions and trying to work with people that are nominally vocally on our side, one of the problems is that we don't understand the nature, and that partially begins in right education and encouraging not a spirit of safety in youth, but a spirit of foolishness, a spirit of recklessness and scraping your knees and all of that stuff. That's the a good stepping off point to really reorienting ourselves in that human nature and in that idea that you shouldn't give up your dreams as you're getting older. You should not become realistic as you get older. So yeah, that's how I would reply to that query.
Yeah, great. Let me just try a curriculum map that I think would be useful for this reconstruction, and
Mm,
let you respond to it as a historian, and someone who's interested in development.
mm.
So I'll just mark this out on a drawing, and I'll show you, and then I'll say what it is.
Oh, please.
I'm just always looking for a really simple model.
The famous Dr. Fisher whiteboard.
All right, so I'm basically mapping out a telos here. And I remember in your video when you were talking about the Fearology Center recently in your 10th anniversary at the Institute, and you said, I like the Fearology Center because it fits our telos. Not too many educational leaders talk about that word, for one. And I was so glad you did. And I went, well, this is my sense of the telos. Fearlessness is this arc. And so we'll just leave it as fearlessness as this arc. And off that, I have sort of three levels, if you will. So this first level at the foundations, that's fear. And I said, we need to have a foundation of our development that has a great intelligence and understanding, study, inquiry into fear. And without that at the base, we are going to go askew. And what comes after is I put love. I could have put sexuality there, and that sexuality would fit in there. It's like, this is our fearuality, this is our sexuality, and this is our spirituality, which I put the word freedom. I think this is the major meta drivers of the human condition, and ultimately this human nature that you speak to is we are moving along that path, and it's a lot of hard work. And you don't just get to one and not the other. You're always looping back, and I still got to go back and work on my fear. My love and sexuality is distorted. My freedom's distorted. Well, you probably got to go back and do some love and sexuality work. You've got to come back here. I'm very interested at your institute. You have the nativists, the naturists, the people who practice that tradition as part of the Institute. And I go, that is really that attempt to get back to the natural underneath the phobia of sexuality and the body, right? That is driven often by this distortion because we aren't managing and handling or educated in fear very well. So, and then we, of course, we think we're trying to get freedom all the time, but we're not integrated. So this is an integrative curriculum that I would see at a core for any good institution of reconstruction. Your thoughts?
Yeah, so I'd like to talk about the telos and then the naturist aspect and how that fits into things.
Yeah.
Making notes towards the end
so
here.
Just explain
but
for
yeah,
people,
it's
explain for what the naturists are and how they came to your institute.
Okay. Sure, I will do that. Let me just make a point about the telos. So telos, if people don't know, that's like the final end. That's the purpose for it existing. So for Mikhail there, he had that great whiteboard illustration, and I have a similar illustration on the college site, and it's very much in the same neighborhood there. So the purpose for it, the school existing, and all the work, and what's the purpose? That's the telos. For your Quebecois people, that's also called the raison d'etre. So the reason for being. Yeah, so having laid that out, and by the way, people they I often get feedback. Oh, you look at the philosophy write-up, and you're going to drive people away, and you shouldn't have a telos. And the mainstream schools have a telos. Their telos is, I mean, actually, some of them are honest enough to put it on their building. They were the public school, right? What's the purpose of a public school? And by the way, the private schools have the same model, and the home schools have the same model. Public, that's their telos. What's public? Commercial, right? Why do those schools exist? They're honest. I don't give them any hard time. They're honest. We want to make batteries for this system. We want to make public people in our public school. And to do that, you have to dampen down their sense of freedom. You have to scare the hell out of them with fear. That's the only way you're going to get a malleable employee for the remainder of their life to be content to work for a stranger. That's the only way you can get a public. So, all schools have a telos, right? We're just honest enough to say what ours is, maybe foolish enough to say what ours is, to elaborate it. But anyway, I did want to revisit that part of what you had said there, Michael. And then towards the naturist aspect or nudist aspect, that is to say, people who are socially naked, non-sexually, practically, how did the group associated with Apocatastasis come about? And that group is Litchfield County Naturists, and we have a sub site on the college's page. How did that come about? Well, there was a group in New York that had fallen apart. Just another sign of the decomposition of societies, that people don't join groups, so groups get formed for years and they fall apart because people get burned out. And Mikhail and I know that in our own work, how easy that is to happen, because there's a lot of talkers, not a lot of doers. So another group fell apart in New York. And I'm the sort that has a spitting contempt for people who complain about things and don't do anything about them. So if you ever hang out with nudists, one of the things they're constantly complaining about is there's no events and everything, all the camps are closing and all this stuff. Well, then you have to do something about it. So that's the practical origin, probably in 2017, 2018, of Litchfield County Naturists. But how does that fit with the telos of Apocatastasis? And how does it fit, I believe, in healthy family rearing and in educational settings as well? I'm right now writing an essay on this very topic. And again, grace builds on nature. And something happened last year, which I'll just sketch out briefly. I've alluded to this with Michael some. But the Litchfield County Natures Group was very, it was very obvious on our website that it was there. And I've not hidden that aspect of the work. You can find stuff going back like 10 years and news stories and I was in a documentary for Vice News and other things too. But the point is, last year, one of the school families whom I had known and had gotten to be quite close with for a couple of years there, they found this out, and immediately, I mean, there was very dysfunctional personal behavior, let's say. And just the example in Ridgefield as a petri dish. In this essay, I'm going to use these individuals, the parents, as an example of the fear, because what was happening was, I mean, so many things. I mean, I almost obsessed about what happened last year. For a while there, I mean, it was. I liken it in the essay to probably how like someone who has a traumatic death happens, and you can't. You died or whatever. You can't. All last year. And probably hundreds of thousands of times I thought, I mean, just trying to break down what the hell happened. These people that were so friendly, and you realize, like, fundamentally, it's because they're a misunderstanding of the body. Their misunderstanding of the body, all the baloney that they were taught about the body and about what's called modesty in this society, all of the the distortions in pornography and the way the body is presented, and then this whole other culture which has also arisen since the 80s with things like John Walsh's kid being killed and so forth. This whole culture of fear and this, what the media does to exaggerate fear concerning children and whatnot. So there was, I mean, it's such an unfortunate petri dish of what as a people in America and across the West, something that's so innocent and something that's so common. Literally, we all have bodies. That's in the essay. What I mean to really examine is, why have we been told this about our body, and why have we been given this shame, and why do we have all of these assumptions, and why were we taught this, and what social ends do they serve? And um, uh, that's what this forthcoming essay is going to be about, on nudism and family rearing and education and so forth, because we have to go deep. We really have to go deep. We have the ideas politically. We know all about the shenanigans that's going on about this politician and this secret group and that and this event and whatever. Okay, great, awesome. But we need to reach real deep down and uh, personally and socially really look at these things. You know, these people for the Petri dish, I mean, these were people of admirable qualities, and yet there was this whole sub-basement of fear and paranoia that all of a sudden sprung into action.
Yeah.
And I really want to examine that, and how nudist and naturist philosophy can really calm people down on that, and really give us a good grounding. Just, if your feet are busted, you don't stand right, or whatever, your arches are down, right? That's going to affect the remainder of your body. And if your gait is off, that's going to affect your back and so forth. And the same with ourselves. If we have a distorted understanding of the body, if maybe people with certain agendas told us certain things about our body and about nudity and about interactions and dangers, if that's distorted, grace builds on nature, the bigger ideas and solutions that we have are not going to work. And that's in a big nutshell what I'll be talking about later this spring.
Yeah. Sometimes we would call it foundations, right? If you don't get the foundations in order, and that's why I tend to put fear as a metamotivational force at the bottom of that pyramid of growth and development. Everything's going to get twisted more or less if we don't. And it's a lifelong journey to correct that and to work on that. But that's what I call fear education in simple terms, is we don't have a curriculum for fear education. We have these emotional intelligence curriculums in education and social development. And I've looked at them and I just find them so inadequate. When you study fear as long as I have, for over 3.5 decades, it's just those curriculum are so thin. They basically see fear as just one of other emotions, and there's 8 other ones or whatever, right? The sort of standard psychological text. And that's how they build their curriculums, for emotional intelligence. And I just go, I think your foundation is completely out of whack with actually how humans operate.
Mm.
It's nice and clean, but it's just like you say, that bottom layers, they have the ability to suck everything, the higher significant values, what we might call the higher virtues, right down with this family, for example, that you're talking about. And it moves into the irrational very quickly. And so we're not as rational humans, and we can't maintain. And the romantics knew that, and they questioned that whole rational, we're all rational. Yeah, we are potentially rational, and we have some elements and aspects, but we have a ton of animalness in us. And I think that's what the nativists, nudists, for a good education program bring, and just remind us that we're bodies. Just remember that we're like animals in that sense. And yes, we also have these other capacities, not one or the other. So a good integrated, holistic approach, John, I think it is in the Apocatastasis Humanities Institute. And that, as we bring the conversation just to a close here, back to your book, this first one, where do you take the book in the conclusion? People could say, well, here's John. He's a good analyzer of our psychoses building in the clouds. Where does John take us in that book? And then the 2 or so books that followed. Can you give us an arc of that?
Sure. So the first chapter in the nuts and bolts deals with the Italian unification. The second deals with the First World War and the French mutinies, of which was dramatized in a great film with Kirk Douglas, Paths of Glory. And the final chapter deals with Levittown and the post-war world. So what's the conclusion of that leading into the Trotsky train? The second book, which I have here in my other book, I will dig up for you shortly, the final one. But as for Hurt, here's the cover of the book Mikhail has been quoting. It's a lady that jumped out of the Empire State Building.
Oh, is
It's
that
a horrible picture, but it's a very beautiful picture in its own way.
Yeah, there it is.
But that's on the cover. And what's the purpose of that? Well, to the comments about body perception, also we have to realize that we've been played in the West, that there have been interests in the West, political, financial interests, and spiritual interests that have deliberately inculcated certain attitudes, and even if they didn't have a deliberate agenda, the reality is that our bonds of trust have been constantly broken. In terms of social trust, have been constantly broken. So in Europe, the real break was the First World War. We had to wait in America another 50 years for the Vietnam War to have a similar alienation between the governing structure and the states, for instance. The formal state structures. You see the same thing with formal religious structures, the breaking of social trust. And then, if I were to make additional chapters, which if I have a few more hours in the day, I would like to do a second edition of this and add to it. You can look at the development of the media, which has become, to Marshall McLuhan's point, it's not just exaggerated. It's become life. The art has become life. People live on these cell phones and these televisions now, and part of that is the inculcation of fear via the media, and that's very obvious. I've spoken to, and that's very intentional. I've spoken to journalists, and they'll tell you that they're taught in their shows to always lead with a disaster. And I can tell you that too. I have someone in this house that turns on the news at 6 o'clock every morning for all these years now. And the first story they begin with is, so-and-so got run over last night. Oh, this guy got shanked in a bar last night. This house burned down and whatever. And so you immediately literally hit the ground. You get out of bed and put your feet on the ground. And immediately you're confronted with this negativity. And that goes on to cast throughout the rest of the day. So the purpose, to your question, Michael, for this first book, before we get into the two others briefly, the purpose was to indicate, why things are the way they are now. Why, when you want to have a party and someone offers their house to you, they do something bizarre, in my opinion, of asking for people's ID cards. Or why you want to send someone a Christmas card and they won't tell you their address because they're afraid of you're going to put them on a spam list or something. Or you can't look at somebody on the road except they want to run and hide in a bush because they think you're going to shank them or whatever. How do we end up here? There people are running and there's no one chasing them. How do we end up here? Well, it's the process of 150 years, probably deliberate in my reading of things, but even if not, it doesn't matter. That was a consequence of the events that played out. So that's the first book there. And that brings us to the second book, which is more of a pedagogical focus as opposed to historical focus, the Trotsky Train, Some Words to the Discipulate. And that is a lot of my ideas in abstract, and having tested them out at that other school I mentioned for all those years and certain conclusions I had. That theme I reprised again for my more recent book. Let me see where that is. Well, everyone can find it on the website there with the green cover, An Excess of Love. But that develops a lot of the thoughts from the Trotsky Train, and it looks at that school in Ridgefield, Connecticut as a petri dish. So we have the ideas in the Trotsky Train, and then how those ideas in a kind of half-assed fashion were implemented. Why were they implemented in a half-hearted fashion? Because the nature of that community was not well established. We were all walking wounded from the world. We had not done that shadow work, as they say nowadays. We had not done that stuff. We had our heads full of all the problems of education. We had our heads full of all the solutions, but we did not have the backbone to instantiate it. And because of that, when finally they drove me off, and you have to do a lot to get me to throw my hands up in the air. But finally, I realized it was a hopeless cause after 12 years. Finally, that thing collapsed in a month. That school collapsed in a month. How could a school, the high school part, how could that a work? And it wasn't just me. It was dozens of teachers, all these families. And how on earth could it collapse in a month? And that was a meditation in an excess of love. So in brief, hurt is kind of the meta-historical look of how we ended up here. The Trotsky train is my attempts, at least on the pedagogical front, to address that and to undo some of that hurt in our own interpersonal education and interactions. And then an excess of love is basically a meditation on why, when you try to implement those ideas, they don't fail. Why don't they fail? Because the strata of what it means to be human is something we haven't addressed.
Nice.
And then the nudist essay will be a further elaboration on that.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, it's again, to me, I'm going to try to summarize some of that. Lack of integration of the layers, the meta layers of our motivation, right? It's just when you don't integrate those well, and you get a lot of ideas up here, or even a lot of ideas about love. Excess is a perfect metaphor, but what actually pulls the love to fear and and fragmentation and mistrust and social dissolve and an immaturity that is unbelievable. I think you could conclude your 150 years history. I'm suggesting you probably could have called it a history of immaturity, of growing immaturity that's being held, which is another word for, not to sound judgmental, it's just a diagnostic of dependency. That's exactly what the elites, the powerful players want, is they do not want you to be independent fully. And the more they can make you dependent, reconstruct you to their dependency on the globalizing the democratic capitalism, it's all the different names of neoliberalism and on. It is a dependency. That's what we're working against. Well, education has always been about that, is to unhook our dependency on old ways, not to diss them and throw them all out. And that's why I like your work. I like what the Institute does. It says no, history is important. So in many ways, I see that you are a educational philosopher leader, John, and the people that you gather, the intention really is to get that historical perspective, folks. It's not enough to love. It's not enough to have the ideals and rebel. It's just not enough. So I appreciate you on the history of context you bring to the work. It helps me learn history better, and I love it that you're teaching it to the students that come from early ages. I don't know, most of them in their teens and early 20s, I suppose, but I know you're even thinking of expanding to include younger grades. And then I just will close with this book here that was one I really appreciate. I don't know if you know Robert Peckham.
No, but I must look him up. Thank you, Michael, for that.
Subtitle is An Alternative History of the World, based on an analysis of fear. I've been waiting for a book like that to come out where somebody is using fear as kind of a core central perspective shift, right? On just another way to read. It's not the absolute answer, it's just another angle. And I think, again, trauma, you can see the picture here. It's got a lot of war, post-traumatic imagery in it as well. So that just came out 2023. So thanks for today. I don't know if there's anything you want to just conclude with. Go for it. Other than that, I just really enjoyed this. Thank you, John.
Sure. Just one final note. Well said about the immaturity. That's the well, to your image there, bird's the word. That's the word right there, immaturity, and that goes right back to that whole consumerist aspect that has been proffered for us to see our relationship in society, and I'm very critical of mainstream education or factory schools or Rockefeller education, by which I do not only mean public schools. As I say, private schools and homeschools have the exact same model. The wallpaper is a little bit different, but that's about it. However, in alternative education, you're not going to point a finger, but that you have some pointing back at you. And I would actually say the consumerist ethos is bad enough in public school, but it's actually much worse, especially in grade versions of alternative education like homeschool and so forth. The student expects to be served. They have come to see themselves as a customer. They have come to see, in fact, I'm making this up, on some of these homeschool podcasts, I've literally heard the hosts and things referring to teachers without being ironic or being funny or snarky, but earnestly calling the teacher a service sector worker. And that's, I would say, the predominant fault of alternative education is this idea that the scholar is the servant of the student. It's actually more pronounced than in the normie schools. And this is a sign of immaturity. And it's a sign, frankly, why alternative education has fizzled and really gone nowhere in the past 50 years. All ideas, no discipline to get there. So people, they're happy with their homeschool co-ops, curricula, and okay, that's fine. But there could be a lot more than that.
Well, yeah, it's another
so well
direction.
said, Michael, about that immaturity.
Yeah, it's another direction that goes with it, is creating the bubbles, the bubble over your container of your favorite ideology, comfort zone. And we just keep creating these self-validating bubbles, right, in smaller and smaller ways, because people are doing that because it feels secure. A system that's so big, it's so globalizing, there's so many huge controls, right? So it's got this mass expansion change, and you can see people are retracting to try to get the sanctuary, the safety. Unfortunately, I would say, concluding from our talk today, that's really why I was also interested, is we have to have a historical perspective to watch that cycle of the clouds. And I think that's what you're documenting nicely with the idea that clouds is that they come and they go, and they also obscure the sun. They obscure this symbol of illumination, enlightenment, the ideals of the education, beyond the shadows, beyond the surfaces, to a larger cause, and represented by the universe itself. So nicely done, John. Thank you very much.
Great. Well, thank you, Mikael, for having me on your show here. It's been a great honor, and I look forward to digging into some other episodes and those coming episodes that you have, because this is such a fat topic, and one, again, that's not nearly as covered as it should be in regards to pedagogy, in regards to history and politics, and so many other things you talk about. So bravo for that, and it is such an honor to have the Fearology Center at Apocatastasis and to have your research on hand.
Thank you, John. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.